new to me. So, okay. Hey, world, if anybody's out there watching, welcome. Okay. Are you swamped with tiny house stuff or other stuff?
Both, and then some. We've got the whole kind of summer lineup coming up for the mobile studio. Working on fundraising to build a couple more of them because we've got a ton of commitments for both Parks Department and Department of Transport down here.
Yeah.
Plus we have participatory budgeting applications into the city to do a couple of specific projects for Queens and for Gowanus in Brooklyn. So all of that is in play. And then I can't remember when the last time we spoke to you was, but since maybe November of last year, we've been working with a group of artists that basically lost the lease on the shared space that they'd had for about 10 years. And we're having real problems trying to get a landlord to lease to them at any kind of reasonable rate or even return their calls. And so we kind of stepped in to help them negotiate leases and talked about maybe taking the master lease for them and then subletting back to them if that made it easier for the landlords. And it's kind of snowballed into this big kind of initiative to tie up as much industrial studio space as we can before the market just, we really feel like we're at crisis point where in New York City, we're gonna run out of industrial space at a price point where artists can work. I mean, even solid mid-career artists, which is what this core group of artists we're working with are, like seriously, making money off their work, solid Ivy League teaching jobs. They can't get a lease to save their lives.
That's crazy. That's crazy,
so,
but it's similar in the Bay. I mean, I think you can get it in a really dodgy space or a really like a undesirable space, but it's hard to get anything decent.
Yeah, I mean, it's been like that here for a while, and the solution has always been just move out, go further out, move into. But the problem is we're actually running out of dodgy areas, and we're running out of the type of industrial buildings that work for artist studios. There's just a finite amount of them. They're not building any new, and there's now this incredible pressure from kind of both tech and from the kind of design / maker sector, both of which have much higher rental price points than anything artists can afford. So we're literally seeing, I think, maybe the last gasp of artists being able to rent space for themselves.
Yeah. Hey, so we're just doing a little live broadcast about tiny art spaces. If you want to join.
Sure.
Okay.
Say hi. Yeah, I'll say hi. Hi, I'm Jason Lenetsky, the director of the Anderson Collection here.
Great. I'm David Szlasa. I'm the guy who worked with students to design and build the space.
Nice. So, well, thank you for making it all possible.
This is Guy Buckles, who works with Art Built Mobile Studios. They're in New York. They have a similar project through the Queens Museum and also through Parks Department. They're building a bunch of relationships with other places to deploy your studio and hopefully build more, right? I mean, that's the short.
Yeah, and in a broader sense, to make the case for the city that using public spaces like parks and public plazas as places for artists to actually make creative work is kind of a really good way of supporting the arts in a time where we're under a lot of pressure in a real estate sense.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So thanks for having us out front.
No, of course, it's our pleasure. I mean, we're really happy that Studio 2 landed here on campus at the Anderson Collection. And it's been really fun for us to, have our visitors engage with the students here who have built this project and put it together with you. So we're really excited. I mean, I think clearly it's an obvious statement, but artists are really the lifeblood of art museums, right? And so it's really, we feel that we're dedicated to bringing their voices and their ideas and thoughts to everybody. And the practice of making is something that is clearly intrinsic to, what we want to do here too.
Yeah.
So
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited. I've never been in the building.
Oh, great.
So we'll look forward to getting into this afternoon.
Yeah.
So
great. We're open now. So come.
Okay. Thank you.
Enjoy. And thank you for for being a part of this.
Of course, that's me.
Great.
Yeah, I'll be here until 4, and then students will be in and out for the rest of the week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay.
Nice to meet you, and
Likewise.
keep up your efforts. They're well intended, and I think you'll see some success.
I hope so.
We're all hustling.
Good. No, keep it up. Keep it up.
Guy, let me give you a little studio tour while we have a minute here, because I'm not sure
Yeah,
where
definitely.
Torkwase is, but so this is Studio 2,
Uh-huh.
the one I
saw-
built.
The lovely wood.
Yeah, right. So this is, we're right now in front of the Anderson collection, which is the new art collection at Stanford. Anyway, Studio 2 is was built at Jasper Ridge, the biological preserve, on campus at Stanford. The front facade of the studio is live oak from trees that fell on their own kind of lifespan at the preserve, and then many of the boards were milled before we got there, but much of the stuff we also milled, particularly the pine on the inside, which is Monterey pine, also from the preserve, we milled as part of our project. Reclaim windows, they're part of Jasper Ridge, their research station, that they pulled their old windows out. It's 12 feet by whatever the max width is. It's like 7'8" or 8'2", or I don't know.
8.5, I think, 8'6".
Yeah. Yeah, so it's at max width. You know, corrugated siding on the other sides, another kind of window. This side was our quick side.
Yeah.
I know you know that.
Then milling there.
Yeah, and then solar.
Nice.
It's a 250-watt solar panel on the roof going down to a battery array. Unfortunately, they have us parked under a tree here at the Anderson, so our solar is not performing optimally. But then everything that we, aside from the door and the corrugated, everything else, well, and the screws and hardware and stuff, everything else was from the maintenance yard that we plucked and pulled from the maintenance yard at Jasper Ridge. So they do other building projects and construction up there, and we had access to that stuff. So all the trim, all the there's plywood, anything else we needed, we pulled. It's all been reclaimed and reused. So the ceiling's a little bit rough ply. And then this is the Monterey pine. So beautiful. Wood we milled into tongue and groove after. We've got our little utility bench where our battery array is, and our electronics to support the battery. And you can see we have the front readout for all that stuff and a kill switch, so we can manage our solar. The students, it was myself and one other carpenter. We built it over a 2.5-week period every day. 11 or 12 students, and myself and another carpenter. We knocked it out, the whole thing in that time. There's a little bit of cleanup and kind of renovation that was fixed up after the fact. They went in and tidied up some of the things that we had to hustle through in the final days. But all student built and designed, and it rolls, and it came down. It took the journey from Jasper Ridge and didn't fall apart. So we're all very proud of that.
Very positive.
Yeah. So that's Studio 2. You've seen the images of Studio 1, and now this is in play here on campus as a kind of auxiliary art space for students. They're still working out, 6 months after it came online, they're still working out how to curate and manage the space. Hopefully that gets resolved soon.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to get a hold of our Torkwase. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, I spoke to her yesterday. She had an opening in my neighborhood, and she was definitely aware that this was happening. So hopefully she'll be on.
Yeah. Yeah, did you see the I-beam opening of hers?
Yeah.
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 I wish I could have been there. Sorry, I'm just gonna send her a quick message. Yeah. Oh, and Jay Austin. Let me see if he can do it. Do you know Jay from? I just
Don't
see
know.
his. I'm gonna invite him anyway. He said he can't do it, but.
Nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Yeah, right. So he just said he's back from Morocco after a trip. So, whatever. If he can do it, he can do it. So tell me more about what you guys are doing. What the stuff is going on with the city. Or so you've. Is it all to move the studio you've got right now, or are you? I know there's some plans to build others, but there's
so basically we have a two-track approach. We've got a bunch of funding requests in. If any of those come in, then we'll use those funds to build at least one, probably 2 or 3 more mobile studios for programming here in the city. But at the same time, we're kind of making another planning track, which is just using available resources, which is the one prototype studio that we've already built. And deploying it in a bunch of different environments, a bunch of city neighborhoods, both in parks and in public plazas. So we're working with Parks Department and with Department of Transport, who we actually have been really, really pleased with the response from the city after our pilot program in Flushing Meadows Corona Park with Queen's Museum last year. We had thought that we were going to have to, do case making with the city for, 18 months, 2 years before we got any traction. And actually, the project was so well received that Parks Department, Department of Transport, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs all really rallied behind the program and invited us to expand it very seriously this year. So we'll be doing.
I mean, were they able to drop resources on you too?
Some. I mean, not substantial enough to do, multiple builds, but we've certainly got programming money, which helps.
Yeah.
So we're going to replicate the mobile residences that we did with Queen's Museum in the summertime. Before that, we'll be doing a residency, kind of a public-facing, community-engaged arts residency in sort of a public plaza over the railroad tracks in Southwest Brooklyn, which again is going to run along a similar model, probably different type of art, different arts group than who we had last year, but again looking to really kind of activate the public space and engage the local residents in kind of creative process, as well as providing kind of entertainment value for the local area. And then we have a big ask in, which is kind of a multi-year in-depth intervention in public park in what's called the New York City, I'm totally blanking on the acronym now, but it's, it'll come to me in just a moment.
That's right.
But basically, the Parks Department is reinvesting in disinvested neighborhood parks that haven't received substantial funding in over 20 years, almost all of them in, neighborhoods where poverty and lack of security are an issue. So
Sure.
As part of that, they're investing in infrastructure, but also supporting that investment with public programming. And so we're working with them to, really do targeted public engagement through the arts in one or more of their targeted parks. And that, we hope, is going to kick off towards late summer or early autumn, and then continue for at least 2 years.
That's great. Yeah.
Yep.
So you would just roll your unit into the park, have program that would help kind of activate the corner of the park or whatever that you're in an effort to meet their agenda of just by adding life to it, it would somehow subvert some of the other challenges faced in the park. Is that
Yeah, and the notion also is to build capacity for the local community. And, you know, in our experience running the mobile residencies, we find a tremendous amount of engagement with, you know, just even walk-in traffic, people strolling by and wanting to know what's going on.
I just met the director of the Anderson.
Exactly. And so the notion is that, you know, one of the identifying factors for these neighborhoods at risk that the Parks Department is trying to support is that they tend to have, you know, either poorly resourced or non-existent local stewardship groups. And the idea is to use this public programming as a fulcrum point to try and start to develop that community activism around the park that can then support the community more broadly in different ways. Is that we bring in a cultural partner, we bring in our existing ties with the city government through parks and cultural affairs, and we start essentially training the local stewardship group in how to do community activism for a given set of needs, in this case cultural, but you know, the same skill set could be applied in any number of different ways. So it's really kind of community development through an arts lens.
Right. Yeah. Let me pause 1 second. The folks here at Stanford want to get a get access to our conversation. I'm just trying to figure out how to do that. This is I'm stretching my Hangout skill set a little beyond what's comfortable.
Well, better you than me, because my skill set comes as far as pressing the green button. That's all I know.
Right. Well, what's her name? Claudia. Yes. Okay. Right. Okay. Hopefully that worked. What did I do before I could multi-screen? I have no idea. It's just one me and one conversation with real people. I don't know. It seems so
last century.
Yeah, like, geez, very, yeah, 20th century. So and then the build, why would you build more? I mean, what's the logic for building more at this point?
Well, basically, we want to capitalize on the interest from the city departments that have expressed interest while it's there, and we would like to actually have, you know, multiple ongoing programming streams. You know, the idea for this is to build the bigger case that this should be kind of a more or less permanent fixture in New York City public spaces, and a model for other cities to hopefully adopt. And we think that, you know, while doing single demonstrations is great, if we could be doing lots of them at the same time, it would forward that agenda much more effectively.
Yeah. And are you having artists, buyers, or like permanent users interested in the spaces?
You know, we've been getting a lot of interest. So far, we've chosen not to really go down that path very far, because what we want to do, especially in New York City, but more generally, I think it's something that applies in almost any environment. We want to make sure that we set the seeds for regulatory change that would allow this to be legal in an ongoing way, and allow artists to use public spaces, you know, with the consent and the support of their cities, rather than in a kind of a guerrilla way, which is, you know, something that's dogged the tiny house movement a little bit as well. Is that just kind of get it done and see if anybody stops me? You know, at some point somebody is going to get stopped, and then there's going to be
something happened in LA. Did you see that there was a crackdown on tiny houses in LA this past week?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and at the same time,
those were, you know, I think it was maybe not as big blow to the movement as it could have been, because I think they were targeting mostly the like ultra tiny kind of homeless people mini house, as opposed to tiny houses generally. And I think that they were seeing it as a quality of life issue involving the homeless rather than kind of a structural issue around mobile dwellings.
Yeah.
At least I hope that's the case. But this is always a looming danger.
Yeah. Well, and then also and Fresno. I don't know if you saw the article I posted from Fresno. The city of Fresno in California just passed legislation to essentially legalize tiny houses as outbuildings as part of a larger property. That I mean, and that's awesome. That's what the Bay Area. That was what prompted me in my use, and I kind of skirted around some of the more complicated questions just by not having facilities in it. Just by no plumbing or no whatever else. But
just as we've done with our
exactly. But but it's interesting to see Fresno, which is a city that was hit hard in the mortgage crisis and has a lot of people kind of in too deep, and at the same time a shortage of affordable housing, and it just is an interesting solution for them. And and that's why I invited Jay from DC. Do you know much about their process? And I know they got hung up and they weren't able to live in their spaces for a while, and then do you know if they're in them now, or are they?
I have not been tracking it over the last few months. We've been in contact with them last year sometime, hoping to get together and brainstorm around exactly these set of regulatory issues and looking at the approach they'd taken, where it had worked, where it hadn't. As you say, I think that the long and the short of it was that they hadn't got residential approval. Which was kind of why they were positioning their spaces as studios rather than dwellings. I think not necessarily skirting the issue, but framing it in a more user-friendly light for the city. But I haven't heard as to how that all played out.
Yeah, I don't know. I just want to say I got a message back from Torkwase. She is ill, unfortunately, and voiceless, so she's going to be bowing out of our little thing. So
yeah, she said she had a bit of a cold coming on when I saw her, so it must have really come on.
Yeah. The in terms of how are you guys in? So when you were in Flushing, you were on city property.
And that's kind of it's been a very intentional decision on our part to do this kind of proof of concept case making through city agencies that own their own lots, their own properties, whether it's parks or plazas, because they basically have regulatory control over those spaces. And using typically public art permitting, we can then activate those spaces with tiny studios without raising the broader issue of, is it legal to, for example, park a tiny studio on the street and work from it? And we want to, build the public awareness and hopefully build a desire for and a welcoming of this kind of programming in public spaces before we tackle that issue head on, and hopefully build some allies in city government to help us do that.
Yeah, have you tried it in private property, or do you know some of the different hurdles that would come up if you were in private, or I guess the difference between city and public, like when you were in front of the museum, the Contemporary Museum, did you guys park on the street? Do you feed the meter, or what did you do?
Well, they had taken out a temporary street permit for that Festival of Ideas that we were participating in. So again, it was an existing public art or public event permitting process that we were able to take advantage of. Right. We haven't made big forays into kind of street usage yet. I think that's something that we'll get to in the next year or two. But right now, there's only two of us in the organization. We've kind of got our hands full just with parks and plazas.
Yeah. I mean, my experience, Studio One in San Francisco. So I was on public property. I was on the sidewalk. So I was on public right of way, which I learned is a particular type of public property. And then the second location I was on Market Street was in private property. So I was back in a little kind of plaza area that was owned by the bank that was in front of it, or the primary tenant was a bank, and but it was owned by some, you know, real estate development company or something. So, but the private property was really easy, like surprisingly easy, in terms of the deployment, that the city didn't care as long as we didn't break the law. And I just had to work out a kind of lease arrangement or some sort of arrangement with the building ownership, which was tricky because they, you know, there's the local building manager, but then they're a national, you know, real estate agency, whatever they're doing. They own buildings all over the country, and they issued me this like lease template that, you know, 60 pages deep of all, you know, all this stuff that I'm like, well, I'm parking a building out front of your building for 10 days. You know, it's like, it's very kind of strange, but I signed it anyway because we just, before it would be an issue, it was over. But I was surprised that that private property in San Francisco was so easy to negotiate in a way versus the public spaces. The public right-of-way was very complicated. It was Department of Transportation got involved, all this permitting process, even though it was a public art install, and there was a general template for its behavior, or its you know, what public art, how that works in the past in the city, and they were able to look at some of these things. It was still very, very complicated, and for myself going into the future of how it would go, you can come on in.
I'm new here and I didn't know what this was.
Sure.
I didn't know if this was an exhibit or what it was.
Yeah, so this is a tiny art space. We're right now just doing a teleconference. This is Guy. He's in New York. He also built a tiny art space in New York. And we're talking about some of the complications in building a little house on wheels for artists, and the legalities around it, and the kind of future uses and ideas of it.
I could live in a little house like this.
Totally, right?
Give me a bathroom here, the bed, I'm good.
Well, you know, in the flip up thing, you could have maybe like a 5-gallon bucket. Would that be all right for you?
I guess so.
All right. All right. Thanks for coming by. I'm David. I'll be here until about 4 o'clock. All right. Hey, I see there's some viewers out there. I believe you can chat in if you'd like, which is nice. I'm David Szlasa. I was here at Stanford, built this tiny house I'm sitting in, Studio 2, with students at Stanford University. Joining us is Guy Buckles in New York from Art Built. And we're talking about some of the complications around tiny studios. And you'll see I'm in the tiny studio. Here we are. It's about 72 square feet. I'm parked in front of the Anderson Collection on campus at beautiful Stanford University. And as people come in and out, we're just joining them in our conversation as well. We're supposed to be joined by artist Torkwase Dyson, who built a tiny studio really to facilitate her art practice as a painter, in which she would drag her tiny studio, around the country and paint from it, or use it as a kind of launching pad for her painting research. And that's my understanding of her, like the genesis of her work. Does that sound right to you, Guy?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of her work, as I understand it, is very strongly based in place and history. And her notion was that in making work of that type, the ability to actually work on site with the sort of issues that she's researching for her paintings would be both useful and an extension of the actual practice itself into the space where the history occurred.
Yep. And I'll just say quickly for those who joined, I got into building tiny houses to support my own practice as well. I was at the time living in Oakland, California. I'm a video artist primarily, although I do build and create public art projects, mostly using digital technology embedded in some way. But I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment, and my first son was born, and what was my studio space in the house, any semblance of being able to work at home, which is where I worked, was quickly demolished by my son's needs in a good way. And I applied for funding through the Center for Cultural Innovation in California, which funds materials for artists. And I spun a story in which I would, using their grant, purchase materials in which I would construct a tiny house studio for myself. I was funded the maximum grant, which was $6,000, and from that built, out of necessity primarily, and social interest in my own value set, using primarily, almost exclusively reclaimed materials found on Craigslist and from construction sites and things, built a 64 square foot tiny art studio on wheels, which was parked in front of my house for a long time. And then was invited by the city of San Francisco and a few other presenting organizations in the Bay Area to work as a mobile public art studio on Market Street in San Francisco, which is one of the things we've just been talking about, and also in front of Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and a few other spots in Oakland. I just noticed also on eBay, a tiny studio came up for sale that was built by students in Berkeley from Realm Charter School. They're a middle school and high school, and I met those guys. I brought my tiny house up there as a showcase because it's an awesome school. It's a design build school for kids, so rather than have a typical classroom structure where you learn your kind of, however you learn, they take on a project and they use the project of building a tiny house to get their math curriculum and their science and everything else. And so these guys built two mirror image, beautiful tiny houses, in which one they donated to a homeless advocacy group, I believe, and the other they sold on eBay to fund forward their next year's construction. It was a screaming deal. I don't know who won it on eBay, but if you're the winner out there, congratulations. But I think they just wanted $7 grand for a hand-built, very beautiful. I know. I was like, I should just buy it. But
had I only known.
I know, right? And they did a wonderful job. So anyway, but I'd taken it there and a few other places, and then just to bring it to why I'm sitting here at Stanford, that. Through the Arts Intensive program and Stanford Arts Institute, I pitched a class to build another studio with students rather, here on campus, and we constructed Studio 2 from reclaimed materials and materials that we milled from Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve. Thanks, Philippe, if you're watching, and thanks, Sarah Curran, who were both really instrumental in making that happen. And Gina also, who ran the Arts Institute program. And we built this in about 2.5 weeks with myself and one other carpenter, overseeing the students, many of whom never used any power tools before they came to class, and were quite, they rose to the occasion beautifully. So anyway, that's the blah, blah, blah. But thanks for joining us, to those of you guys online. And I guess, so I just moved to New York, to the Hudson River Valley. I'm about 100 miles north of the city in a farm country. And my tiny studio now sits in front of my farmhouse. And I'm having a hard time, guys, seeing its value in a rural setting. And yeah.
Go ahead.
No, and I'm wondering what the meaning of space and built structures. Typically, you don't move a building when you build it. You build it on some kind of foundation or something. Mm-hmm. And this building had the opportunity to move 3,000 miles across country, and now is in as a backdrop of apple orchards and kind of beautiful pastoral setting. And I'm trying to figure out now what its future is. Mm-hmm. And I have a few opportunities to bring it back to the Bay Area potentially, which seems like a long way to go for this little house. And I'm just wondering what to do with it, and I'm curious if there is, just to reflect with you a little bit, if there is if this is a kind of urban specific issue, or is it specific to places that are, is this a solution that's more suitably geared toward cities or areas where real estate prices are really high, and so you can kind of subvert some of those things? Or what, I guess, it's leading me a lot to think about, well, what are the key virtues and values of this tiny studio? And how does it make sense? And
yeah, I hear you. I can share some of my thinking, some of our thinking about these issues, and some of the experience that we've had in talking this through with people around the country. We developed our version of the mobile studio concept largely in response to the affordable space crisis here in New York City. So the genesis of the idea was very much about, how can we subvert real estate markets? How can we make it possible for artists to continue to have, viable financial lives in a real estate contested city? But kind of as we worked on the project, and it kind of ramified outward in a bunch of different ways, we found actually some really hopeful notions around other environments where it could work. In urban terms, we've seen a lot of traction in two places. One, the sort of real estate contested environment that I was just talking about as regards New York City, but the same would be true in the Bay Area. And the other is in disinvested cities, in places like Rust Belt cities, like, for example, Philadelphia is a place where we've done a fair amount of work, where the existing built environment was built for a different age, and there hasn't been significant investment in it since, in most cases for over a century. And where not just artists, but a whole kind of constellation of small producers, small organizations, social service organizations, etc., are really challenged to find usable space, functionally usable space, as well as space that economically makes sense for them. What we've seen is, the mobility piece of it is useful for people that want to work in more than one geographical area within a given city. So whether it's artists whose practice kind of has them interacting with the public, and they want to do that in more than just one space, or from something more ambitious than just their walk-up studio in a building somewhere. But we've also seen a lot of interest from social service organizations who are kind of tied to their geographic location by their rented space or by their bricks and mortar space, but would actually like to work more broadly if there was a platform for them to do that. So those two environments for us make a lot of sense in urban terms, the really contested city and then the disinvested city. Where we've also had some really interesting conversations, though, is precisely in a rural environment like you were just describing. And we've had some really good talks with Springboard for the Arts in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. They do a lot of work in rural communities in the Midwest, and the concept that we've been playing around with them is one that it would need a certain critical mass. It's not something where a single unit is going to meet the need, but in rural environments where the sort of cohesion and social network that sustains artists in urban environments isn't present. And the idea that almost like a sort of farmer's market, you could have, weekly or monthly meetups where mobile studio users could come and sell their work, interact with the public, interact with each other, and start to form kind of a mobile artist neighborhood, as it were.
Right. So they would be personally owned units across a county or something.
Exactly.
That would agree to assemble an art center at a given time or place or whatever. That's, yeah.
And the beautiful thing about mobile studios is that can be just a flat piece of land somewhere. It doesn't have to be a museum or a library or any built infrastructure. It can just be a place where you can park a few trailers.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I am now, is like, is starting to make relationships as a auxiliary programming to other events and bigger institutions that have something going on already, like in my county and in my areas. Like, does it make sense to say, oh, well, in addition to what you're doing, I'm going to roll up and have something else going on inside. It's just tricky because the space isn't the main need.
Mm-hmm.
There's a ton of space for the most part, and it, like, usable built interior spaces to do whatever. So the add-on of this is anyway, that's just one of the questions that I'm trying to figure out right now, and where does it make the most sense, and the flip side of it is, well, can it just exist as a really nice studio in a beautiful pastoral setting for myself? Can it go back to its original purposes, except now I live in the country?
Mm-hmm.
And I can, although I've got square footage inside my house and in my barn and whatever else, I can still use this as a pleasurable little art space. And even to go so far as, well, is it, I've built a number of residency centers or residency programs where artists are invited or get funding to come and make work at a particular place. And that's how Range existed up and down Market Street when I was there with Studio One. And can there be a little cluster of these buildings out on my farm where that get funded as a kind of residency center in a rural environment? And then the whole center could conceivably travel, as you suggested, to reposition itself to showcase the work. Should that be of interest or whatever. So
yeah, to me, that seems like a fairly compelling vision of, so many of the existing residency templates are about kind of providing, rural agrarian atmosphere for people to work in. And the nice thing about mobile studios is the flexibility that they afford in, being able to just put them somewhere for a while to test it out, to find out whether there's a market for this, to find out whether it works better in this location or that location, whether it works better if it moves or stays static for months or years. And the notion then of meeting the challenge of having a remote rural location for the residency, and then having a way of accessing a public to display the fruits of that residency is, to me, really interesting. The idea that you just roll 8 or 10 trailers down the road to the nearest town or city and put on an event. I think that would be amazing.
Yeah. The to change subject a little bit, how's your studio holding up, you guys?
So far, so good. Touch wood. We've had no maintenance issues. Really, we've towed it fairly long distances now. It's traveled several hundred miles on various types of road, and we've had the only major maintenance issue actually was a result of my own clumsiness. I leaned too far off a ladder and pulled the air conditioner coolant line loose and had to fix that and refill the air conditioning system. But other than that, we've had almost no maintenance on it.
Are you tell me about the power infrastructure in the studio. You have electric in the studio in plug-in power?
So far, again, because we're working primarily in an urban environment and in partnership usually with a local arts organization or a community stewardship group or so forth, we tend to have access to grid power in almost all of our locations. So to date, we haven't deployed it in an off-grid configuration. We've designed it with that in mind. But we haven't actually used solar or the other option that we've been working on the assumption of is a biodiesel generator to tie in. But all of those would be external systems. We didn't build anything into the studio itself in terms of alternate power.
Yeah, I worked out there's some great bicycle power things that was part of my pitch to the city of San Francisco. We didn't end up needing it because we got in a place that got adequate sun exposure, but was to add to the kind of social engagement side of it. Say, hey, cool, sit down while you're talking, while you're hanging out, looking at what we're doing. We just ride the bike for 5 minutes because you're powering our thing. And I found some that were really, well, it depends how much. I'm not using air conditioning units or whatever. I don't know what your draw is, but I was able to scale basically on a single pedal system. We could pedal for just a couple hours to keep the batteries full all day at full usage.
Wow,
so
that's amazing.
So they're out, between your panels. Solar's hard in the city because you have such shading issues, right? And particularly even going into parks because you get placed in trees or whatever. I mean, here we are on Stanford's campus, probably one of the top 10 sunniest campuses in the country, and we're under a tree. And the solar is totally flat as far as I can tell. We're just, it hasn't been topped off even. So, so another way to get it in, but the generator, are there issues in running a generator in New York? I mean, there are issues in the Bay Area for sure. You can't run generators outside, or certain kinds and sizes and stuff.
I believe there are limits to, scale and duration. Part of the reason for leaning towards biodiesel rather than gasoline, which would be a lot easier to, just go and buy a gasoline generator, but we wanted it to be green, and we wanted to be able to make the case to the city if we had to get an exception made that, this is a green power source as opposed to just us polluting up the park.
Yeah, right.
But you see, particularly in a food truck context, generators run on the street all the time, and so clearly there's a regulatory way of doing that legally.
Yeah,
I think not a bridge we've had to cross so far, but one that we feel pretty confident we could.
Yeah. Is there other stuff you want to talk about?
Well, I'm interested in some of your thinking process in your builds that you've done to date, and I'd actually like to hear some around your thinking on solving the power issues, how you did that, how you spec'd and sized the solar, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, so it was part of my. So I've used small solar arrays in other small projects, but building the solar outfit for Studio One, so not this one, but for the previous studio that I built, there are a couple of cool online calculators that help me understand the load that a system could bear, so how much draw versus how big a battery array over what period of time it could work. So it's this kind of, that was the math. And then the dollars of it, right? The other big limiter or big factor in solar is the cost for all your stuff and the weight of all your stuff, because as you know, in the mobile studio, you've got a weight limit. You're on a double axle 10,000 pound trailer, or is that where you guys are at? Or
yeah.
So you're max weight 10,000 pounds?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're on a single axle 5,000 pound trailer here. The state of California further limits that to 3,500 pounds on the highway.
Right.
So we had to keep the weight super down, and when you start throwing 100-pound batteries on, you lose. It's an issue. So so that was the kind of thing for me. But then it became okay. Well, what's the consumption, and really backing up the consumption, and so. So the interior lighting system of Studio 2, which is similar to Studio 1, is LED powered. We've got this little touch button on the wall that turns on and off the LED strip around the ceiling. It's totally enough light, and it draws about 6 watts while on, which is really, really low. And the batteries, we've got 3, I think they're 90 amp hour batteries in there. So you could conceivably have the lights on just those lights on for 2 or 3 weeks probably without any draw issues. And then the other thing we've got is the inverter. So we do have a regular power outlet down here, which might be hard to see, and it's rated at 600 watts, which would be 600 watts is 2 early 2008 Mac Pro towers running at full tilt. All right.
Right.
In terms of what you can do with that. I know that number for a number of reasons, but 600 watts is also not a hairdryer and not a toaster, right? It's like 600 watts is a coffee pot, or 2 coffee pots probably, but it's limited, and that can run. I think on this system, it's maybe 10 hours without a recharge. So it's fairly small, but because this studio, because we're in California, and particularly because this studio, its primary use will be back up at Jasper Ridge, which is a biological preserve with loads of open space and wonderful unshaded areas to park it. It can stay topped off, even at full tilt consumption, it can stay topped off all the time. So it's really about positioning your building once it's deployed to keep it going. That said, because it's mobile, whoever parked it here, they put it here for aesthetic reasons, but not functional reasons. And so the studio is totally underperforming here on campus from a power point of view. And that, in some ways, is bad publicity for the studio and for the movement, which is unfortunate. It's like we got put here and it's not working. That's kind of a drag. So in a urban environment, so then I did the research on how to basically replicate that amount of solar inflow, so about somewhere between 150 and 250 incoming watts of solar power, to keep the batteries going in other ways. And that's where I came to this bicycle charge thing. So, and there's a couple of good options for that. There's one that you can bring your own bicycle and basically like rack it like if you were going to practice your bike inside or something. I'm not much of a biker, so I don't really know, but you can like get your back wheel up off the ground and you can go against some friction. There's a thing like that, so any bike can basically get fitted into it. And then there's the more like you sit down in a chair and it's got pedals and you just kind of like all you do is grind out power. And both options are pretty good, except when you're on your own bike, you've got gears and stuff. You can like play it to your own sensibility, whereas the other one you just kind of sit down and it's you and a resistor for as long as you can, as long as you can pump. But it's I'm committed to it and committed to seeing it work, because part of the reason of Tiny, and aside from its flexibility and mobility, is by being in a smaller space, you have less to heat and cool and light and manage, and to commit to it, not just as a kind of aesthetic statement or a architectural statement, but also a energy statement. Say, okay, if we can scale back some of our size around our expectations, look, it still works, and it's still functional. And so that's kind of the sentiment around it. I think in New York, so I'm spec'd out for California. Solar, every geographic region has its own average sunlight hours and things like that. And so I haven't, time will tell if my system stays where it needs to be in New York. I'm not sure yet. I haven't been using it very much. It has stayed topped off just because nobody's been in there. But and I doubled the size of my battery array when I went to do the Market Street deploy in San Francisco, because we just wanted more, some insurance against running for longer. And I do have pass-through power. So like a car battery charger, like if your car went dead, you could use a little inverter to plug into the wall and then connect to your car battery terminals. I've got that built into the studio. Not this one, unfortunately, but into my other studio. So you could either pass through power or you could charge your batteries through a line in similar to yours. So do you have like a breaker switch then? So when you plug in, you like go through a panel and then you electrify your whole system?
Yeah, basically what we did was replicate what you'd find in an RV, essentially. So we've got an interior breaker panel tied to a RV power plug on the exterior of the trailer. That we just run a power line to the nearest power access point, or if we were going to hook it up to a generator, we'd plug it into the generator. One of the things we've actually been considering and playing around a little bit with the design of is trying to make kind of a modular power pack, like a little mini wheeled something you could trundle out to a sunny spot near the deploy if you got stuck under a tree or next to a building or whatever, that would have batteries and solar panels on it, but could then be moved back for secure storage when you weren't using it. So I'm interested in trying to figure out how to build that, how to spec it. But we, as we've built the prototype unit, it's whatever green power solutions we get are going to be exterior to it rather than built into it at low voltage on the inside wiring like you've got.
Yeah, I mean, what basically all it means is we have all the lighting is 12 volt DC, so it comes straight off the battery without any inverter and degradation or loss. And then the inverter is just for the outlet, so we have a little loss of, there's a efficiency loss in switching from DC to AC. But yeah, so, and I don't know, I think even if it were grid tied, I don't know what, I feel pretty good about that, that there's there's a DC system working in 12 volts around it, as well as the opportunity for AC 120, because both can be expanded. Right, so if they wanted to be like a refrigerator in here, for example, there's all the RV kit stuff you can get for a 12 volt DC, RV fridge, and they're way more efficient. Just in thinking about the staying DC all the way through or AC all the way through, I mean, it's pretty efficient to keep it DC. So,
But going back to something you were saying earlier, one of the things that makes me, comfortable with having designed it kind of primarily is the efficiencies in the tiny structure itself. In other words, our power needs for, even, running a split heating cooling unit in the middle of winter or the middle of summer on the East Coast where temperatures, vary by 100 degrees or more. We don't draw a lot of power. We, the efficiency and the level of insulation that we built into it mean that that unit runs for 2-3 minutes at a time, and most of the time sits idle. So even if we are drawing off the grid, the efficiency of the design helps ecologically friendly from our perspective.
Yeah, and that's in terms of heating for mine. So there's no heating and cooling, because I met with a engineer around that, and he's like, well, between you and your laptop, and if you close the doors and you're well insulated, the heat kicking out of your laptop, like a MacBook, which is not much, and your own body heat, in 20 minutes or so, you'll be comfortable inside. And that certainly has been proven true. Just the small space, fairly low ceilings, well insulated, has been pretty comfortable. And I was also looking at some, there's like terracotta candle enclosures. You can basically, you know what I'm talking about? And they would be perfect. And so we looked at that. The state of California doesn't like you to do that. They're a little fire phobic, but in New York, that was one of the things I was looking at. But the heating in New York, did you guys think about putting a little like propane heater or stove in, or did you stick with the electric?
Again, because so much of what we're trying to do with our prototypes is kind of building a case. We wanted to, kind of head off any potential complaint of, oh, isn't that risky? Isn't it, you know, isn't there a fire danger and so forth? So we chose not to have anything combustible. But again, as you say, the you know, the tiny amount of additional heating or cooling that we need is so easy to supply. I mean, we're so over specified. We bought the smallest split unit that we could buy on the normal market, and it would easily heat or cool 6 times the space that we've got.
Yeah. And you're 20 feet long, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. 20 by 8.5 by 8 feet high.
Yeah. I mean, even the ones I was looking at, the RV heaters and things, I mean, they will cook you, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're meant to have a window open and be 80 degrees inside at the same time. Yeah. So, hey, if any of you guys online who are watching, you can chat in if you'd like. You can add a, if you go to the side, you should be able to chat and ask questions if you'd like. Let me see if I can get that going. Boom. Do you see that now? Anyway, this feature is disabled. Well, how about we enable it? Because we'd love to hear from you guys. Or you can email me at davidszlasa@gmail.com, and we can talk about it. But I'm kind of inclined to wrap up in a few minutes, unless there's other stuff that I'm desperate for, Guy. But I'm just looking at the future of it. So the future for Studio 2 is I'm working with the Stanford kind of behind the scenes to try and create a curatorial vision for the studio. And this space had a lot of like the campus risk management office had to weigh in around it, and a lot of the kind of insurance issues, which I know you guys, the insurance on these things has been tricky.
Yeah, it's been a struggle.
Yeah, but so that was a struggle on campus as well, which I found kind of interesting. But I guess the world is the same everywhere. And but now that that's been sorted out, this unit was built with the intention that it would be a classroom up at Jasper Ridge, and they're trying to find an appropriate class to pair with it. An instructor who'd be willing to do it. So the studio would go up to Jasper Ridge, which is a 1,200-acre preserve on the other side of 280 from here, and also to be able to come down to campus for students to use it as an art space, which is, so it's kind of built with its dual purposes. So that's the future of that. And Studio 1, I think I was talking about, it has, it's in New York right now. It has a couple of dangling invites to be back in the Bay Area, which I'm not sure what to do with. And then I'm trying to find some local partners for deploying it around some of the smaller cities up and down the East Coast. I'm curious if there's a reason to bring it into New York City ever.
Well, actually, we'd be really interested in talking to you about the possibility of doing some joint deployments on, you know, the Parks and Plazas project that we're working on, or for other opportunities. Like I said, we're interested in getting this out in front of the public and building the case as widely and as strongly as possible. So, and as you say, it's only a couple hours down the road, so a lot easier than the West Coast. Yeah, totally. And so we should definitely talk more about whether we could cook something up together.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm leaning toward I don't have any long-term efforts in play. You know, I mean, I'm looking at kind of shorter-term things to test out some of these other options around New York, and just to see where the funding falls too. Because for me, it's about not that everything needs to be funder-driven, but that the funders are responding in some ways to needs that they perceive from a higher position, and trying to understand what some of their, now being in Columbia County, which is like this rural environment, what are some of the local funders there most interested in supporting, and does this in any way jive with that? And then on a more kind of national artist residency model, see if there's some legs there. But so, and then you guys, you'll start in the summer again. Are you quiet now?
We ourselves are quiet. Our prototype unit is down with our programming partner, the Village of Arts and Humanities in Philadelphia, and they'll be programming it through the end of the spring. Then we come back up here at the end of May and launch straight into our Parks and Plazas residency programming.
Great. It's great. You guys have done awesome, I gotta say. I mean,
straight back at you.
The you know, and just for those of you watching, so we started within, I think I was about 9 months ahead of you in terms of the build completion, and had like one cycle of deployment around the Bay Area before you guys went. But otherwise, we've both been kind of figuring out how to do this and support it. And last summer was a big deployment for Studio One for mine, and the build of Studio 2 here at Stanford, and was your first.
Yeah, it was our first full year of programming.
Yeah, with Queens and the Queens Museum and some other places. So as you guys go into your second full year, I'm going in my third full year, which is lighter than second, but also involved a cross-country move and whatever. But the
new baby, so I think that's.
I got kids and a new house. I've got a 200-year-old farmhouse that you want to come up for a project, guy? You just want to like blow some steam off and a nail gun? Like, you should come on up. Yeah, it's there's a lot to do in the house itself, so that's kind of distracting me as well. But it's great to talk to you, and please give my best to Esther. And
absolutely, will do.
And we'll see what the summer holds. I mean, if there is a particular event or even a series of events, or if there's a way that Studio One can play into or just be an asset in any way to what you guys are doing, let me know, because I'm looking at the options available right now and trying to make some decisions about where I want to go and what I want to do. But getting into the city would be cool, honestly.
I'm pretty sure we can cook something up.
Yeah, let's do it. And I'm only 12. That one's 10 feet, you know, so it's much easier. I can go in a single parking space, which that was the premise of it, and it allowed me some really nice flexibilities. And it's narrower. It's only 7 feet wide, so it's just like getting it through the city. It's
a lot less of a pain than ours.
Yeah. So are you? And did you get the big truck? Did you buy it?
Yeah, we ended up. You know, the cost of anything else, whether renting a truck or hiring somebody to tow it, was just so prohibitive that in the end we figured we're going to be doing this for a few years. We need a truck, so we bought the truck.
Awesome. Great. Yeah. Guy, it's great to talk to you. Thanks for those of you who are out there watching. Really appreciate it. So I'm in front of the Anderson Collection here on campus at Stanford. Come see me. I'm here until 4 o'clock today. And if you're not here, you can find me through rangestudio.org. You can find Guy through artbuiltmobilestudio.com.
That's right.
And see you next time. Thanks. Okay.
Take care.
See you. All right.